Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Titanfall. Let's be honest, nobody doesn't already know this. Even if you somehow hadn't played the open beta, the chances are you've at least heard of the bloody thing. It is the brand new shooter from Respawn Entertainment, their first game. A lot of ex-Infinity Ward folks in there, including the head honchos. There was a big split a while ago that you probably heard about. Infinity Ward is a mere shadow of its former self, and most of the talent went to Respawn, and spent the next few years developing a new IP by the name of Titanfall, which is published by EA. And it is a multiplayer-only futuristic shooter involving a combination of on-foot combat, and of course, driving around in big mech things by the name of Titans. You've probably seen my video on the beta. Most of my thoughts can be contained there. There's not really a huge amount of follow-up you can actually do, because, in reality, a lot of the stuff that was in the beta is also here. And there isn't that much extra. The biggest addition, outside of new weapons and perks and things like that that you didn't have access to in the beta, is the campaign mode, and I will talk about that. But there's not really a huge amount to say, I'm afraid. Let's just say I was hoping for something a little bit more flexible than what we actually got. Now, if we head to the options menu, things are, for the most part, the same. They have not given you any higher than 90 field of view. I mean, that's acceptable, but it would have been nice to be a little bit higher. Those asking about the 60 frames per second lock that some people suffered, that doesn't seem to be happening for me. Seems to run fine. I've had 120 FPS across the board in every mode. So, that's pretty much what you'd expect. And that's about it. I mean, there's not much else to say, really. Look at it. It's all what you would expect it to be. It looks very similar to the beta, and rightfully so. So let's have a look at loadouts and just go through some of the new options available. And then I'm going to show you some gameplay from the campaign mode. So, let's go to play first, and I can show you what's going on with that. There is an intro movie available as well, as you would imagine, that just kind of intros the story. Not that it's a particularly complicated story. And once we jump in here, we can have a look at some loadouts and the other Titan classes that were not available. Now, you've got two options here. Training is enforced, by the way, so there is no reason to play this mode. You've got play campaign and play classic. You've got to do the training before you do either of these. And the campaign mode is what I'll spend most of the video talking about, because that's the biggest change as opposed to what was in the beta. And then classic mode, you will see a couple of different game modes available. Not that many, though. Shockingly. We had attrition, last Titan standing, and hardpoint, as well as variety pack available in the beta. So the only two new modes are capture the flag and pilot hunter. Simple as that. Not what people were hoping for, I feel. None of these modes are particularly complex, nor do they have a huge amount of depth to them. So this might be disappointing to some people, seeing only 5 modes here and nothing particularly creative. As per the beta, the most creative mode is probably attrition, which is what the game is designed around. This sort of mixed PvE and PvP experience where you're going to earn a lot of attrition points by destroying huge waves of AI-controlled enemy troops, and then using those to earn your Titan, and of course, picking up pilot kills along the way. That's the main mode. That's still the main mode. Hardpoint is the other main mode, in which it's just domination. I mean, there's nothing to this mode beyond it simply being domination. You'd think maybe there would be some sort of fancy gimmick to it, but there isn't. None at all. And then you've got Last Titan Standing, which you start in a Titan, and you do not respawn your Titan, so that's really about it. It's a reasonable mode, it's a little bit of fun, not something I'd take too seriously. Then, of course, capture the flag and pilot hunter and variety. So yeah, I was hoping for something a bit more than that, and I thought the campaign mode would provide that, but it doesn't. And I'll talk more about that once we get into the gameplay. So, loadouts. New stuff. Should be able to see that. So let's customize pilot and show you some of the other stuff that's available. So, there's about double the number of guns available in this version as opposed to the beta version. So you've got a couple of different kinds of snipers, as well as a semi-automatic rifle now in the form of the G2A4. You have the Hemlock, which is a 3-round burst weapon. Nothing particularly unusual there. Another SMG, and another light machine gun. You've probably used this one anyway because it was available as a burn card in the beta, so this shouldn't really surprise you too much. Unfortunately, nothing really out of the ordinary here that I would describe as blowing my mind. You know, the Kraber, you may have had a chance to use something very similar to that in the form of the burn card one again. G2A4's nice, but none of these guns outside of the Smart Pistol really does anything unusual. Yeah? They're fairly standard, and you have a limited amount of customization that's available, as you can see here. I've got my suppressor, my enhanced targeting right there, which you will usually earn by completing challenges, so enhanced targeting I've got on there, and there doesn't seem to be a way to put any other kind of sight on it, from what I can tell. There are 2 anti-Titan weapons. You've probably seen the mag launcher before. Again, it was a burn card, and then you've got a charge rifle as well, which is a nice energy beam. These don't have customization available. They didn't in the beta. They don't here either, so pick whatever you're most comfortable with. And you've got 1 extra sidearm, which is the B3 Wingman, which takes level 27. It's just a Magnum pistol, essentially. And aside from that, you've got an auto pistol and a sort of fairly heavy semi-automatic. 1 extra tactical ability, that being active radar pulse, as you can see. Lets you see enemies through walls, which can be useful. And then you got your cloak and your stim, again, that was in the beta. And then your ordnance, you have 2 more, satchel charge and arc mines. Simple as that. Satchel charge is what you would expect. Arc mine, it's an EMP mine, basically. So, a couple of extra kits available. You've got your power cell, which you had previously, and you probably saw the enhanced parkour there as well. But you've got the run and gun kit, which is quite nice. I mean, that I can see being very useful, actually, considering the speed at which you can sprint. A quick reload kit, as well as a stealth kit. And your tier 2s, again, 3 new ones. Dead Man's Trigger, which, oddly enough, is like... It seems like these guys have a bit of an obsession with the Martyrdom perk, which was in Modern Warfare, and there's a couple of different variants on that in this game, including the nuclear detonation and this Dead Man's Trigger thing. Let's try that one again. Trigger? What is that? It's not a thing. This increases the speed at which you hack specters and turret control panels. Frankly, I cannot see many people using this. Neither of those features are particularly useful from what I've seen. The turrets, I do not believe were available in the beta maps, but they are here. They're kind of nice, but I can't see anyone using a tier 2 kit for that. I mean, swapping minion detector out for that seems unlikely. And then you've got guardianship as well. So that makes your auto Titan a little bit better. So I can definitely see some people using that, but Ice Pick doesn't seem to be too useful. I may be wrong, of course. The meta may develop past that, but I'm not entirely convinced. So that's it for the pilot customization. Let's have a look at Titans. So as you're probably aware, there are 2 other Titan classes available. However, what they decided to do here, which is a little annoying, is lock those 2 Titans behind a gating wall, which is to complete the IMC or the militia campaign. During the pre-release, it's very difficult to complete either of them because there aren't enough people playing, and if it can't find a group for a particular mission, it will go backwards in the campaign, meaning that I've played the same missions multiple times and not being able to fully finish the campaign, which is very irritating. In this case, you've got to beat both sides of the campaign in order to get the Ogre. This, I think, is completely unnecessary, and it's pretty irritating, honestly. It's nice to have access to new Titan classes, because, let's be honest, the Atlas was getting a bit boring in the beta, but you're seeing a lot of Atlases still. You are able to use a Strider and an Ogre if you decide to use the default loadouts, which are available. There's a tank loadout and an artillery loadout. The artillery is on the Strider, and the tank is on the Ogre. But if you want to customize in any way, well, you are out of luck until you actually beat these campaigns. Now, the difference between them, it's fairly obvious, honestly. They didn't really do anything fancy with either of these. The Atlas is the middle-of-the-road one with a weapon damage boost. Then you got the Strider, which is a bit faster, a bit thinner, has 3 dashes available instead of 2. That gives you a dash core. And then your Ogre, which is just a more heavily armored, slower, larger thing with a shield core. Only 1 dash available, and of course, takes more hits. I mean, that shouldn't really surprise anybody. It's kind of disappointing because I was hoping that they would go a little bit crazier with the core abilities, but it seems like they just wanted an active buff and nothing else. So your primary weapons, you have 3 additional ones. You had these 3 in the beta, And then you've got the plasma railgun, which is a fairly nice sniper rifle, which charges up when you're in zoom. It does mean that your Titan moves very slowly, though. So this is very much a support weapon. I wouldn't get close up with this thing. Then you got the arc cannon, which is a nice little kind of lightning gun, which chains. And then the triple threat, a grenade launcher, which is pretty cool. Good for firing into interiors, as it mentions there. I've seen this used, and it can really gut both pilots and the NPCs if they happen to be hiding inside a structure. One new tactical ability, the particle wall, so that's a stationary force field. Definitely more of a support ability that you have to use in conjunction with other Titans in order to be most effective. And it's pretty hard to justify taking it over something like Vortex Shield or Electric Smoke, both of which have very specific uses. Haven't seen anyone use that at all. Nobody. Ordnance, you've got two new ones. Cluster Missile, which is what you would expect. And then you've got Multi-Target Missile System, which allows you to fire at several targets at once. It's almost like your Titan version of a Smart Pistol, which is your offhand weapon. A couple of extra kits as well. Dash Quick Charger and Tactical Reactor here. Kind of what you would expect on both of this. This, I think, will probably end up getting used a lot. Being able to use Electric Smoke and Vortex Shield much faster seems very powerful. But then again, pretty much all of these are really, really good in their own ways. And then your Tier 2 kit is the stuff that's a bit weird, because Auto Eject and Survivor are not particularly useful. And then you got Core Extender, which I can certainly see being useful. Big Punch, which I absolutely would love to use. And then Core Accelerator, which charges it quickly. So I think you'll probably see people switching out of these into one of these once they've unlocked them, but they're pretty heavy when it comes to the XP requirement. And that's pretty much about it. Which, if you were hoping for anything more than that, well, it's just an addition on what was in the beta. And that shouldn't really surprise you, because the beta was just a slice of the game. So there you go. Okay. So I've shown you really all there is to see outside of the campaign mode. So I'm going to show you some footage from the campaign mode, and then I'm going to talk about the campaign, talk about what I feel about the game, and whether or not my opinions have changed since the beta. So here we go. Alright, folks, let's have a look at some of the campaign mode. And this is the section that I think a lot of people were looking forward to when they heard that it was going to be a story-focused multiplayer mode. That sounded like a pretty cool idea. Well, consider this part of the video to be the filling of the compliment sandwich. My first beta video was very positive in a wide variety of different aspects. And this is going to be the bit where I express my disappointment, which is going to be focused almost entirely on the campaign mode, which is really not what I was hoping for. Maybe my expectations were just too high. But here's the thing, I've seen games which have done multiplayer campaigns better. In fact, one specifically comes to mind, and that of course goes by the name of Brink, which did an awful lot of other things wrong, but when it came to contextualized multiplayer campaigns, it was fantastic. Now, if you're hoping for a Brink-like experience with this campaign, you are going to be extremely disappointed. So there are 2 campaigns in total. I say 2 campaigns, but it's really just 2 sides of the same campaign, each of which have 9 missions, which take about 10 minutes each to do. Now, regardless of whether you win or lose the mission, you will go on to the next one, and everything will go down in the way that you would expect it to. Now, here's the big problem with the campaign. You would expect the campaign to feature a number of different things. Yeah? You want, say, some really cool scripted events, for instance, that actually affect the battlefield in some way. You would want asymmetrical objectives for the militia and the IMC. You know, you'd want both of those. That sounds like a good campaign, doesn't it? Again, it's the kind of thing that Brink had. And you'd also want the result of the mission to perhaps affect future missions in some way. Perhaps there would be a branch in the campaign as a result of key focal points within it. None of these things exist in the campaign for Titanfall. Not at all. So what you have is a series of missions which have a couple of different cutscenes, as well as a couple of scripted events which are entirely cosmetic. In addition to that, you have a few small aspects which are a little different to the regular mode on those particular maps. For instance, the second mission starts, if you're playing as the militia, with a bunch of specters attacking you, and the militia claims to have never seen those before, and they kind of vault over the rooftops and attack you directly at the start. Outside of that, though, the game plays out fairly similar to the way that you would expect. Now, the campaign mode features only 2 game modes, which is really strange. Most campaign missions are just attrition, and they are attrition in exactly the same way as the regular classic multiplayer would be. A couple of them are hardpoints. There is no Last Titan standing, from what I can tell. There is no Capture the Flag, and there's no Pilot Hunter either. So they have 3 multiplayer modes which are not used in any way. Which is a little weird, isn't it? Now, you've got 5 multiplayer modes and you elect to only use 2, meaning that the campaign variety is not particularly strong. Most of the time, you're just going to be playing attrition, and the campaign only really provides you with attrition game modes with a little bit more voice acting and exposition. So there'll be a cutscene to start you off instead of just jumping out of the dropship, and there'll be a cutscene at the end, and there'll be a lot of voice acting that kind of explains the story to some degree. What it also does is it kind of contextualizes how well you're doing by saying, oh, well, we can't do this because we don't have access to the hardpoints or whatever. Now, what you would hope is that it would allow you to complete some kind of sub-objective, which would enhance your cause in some way, but it doesn't. Everything is linked to either attrition or hardpoints. So even if it says, oh, you know, we can't get access to this, you think, oh, do I have to go do something special? No. What it'll then tell you is, go capture hardpoints, or go kill more pilots. And that's about it. So, here's the problem with campaign in general, yeah? The idea of doing a multiplayer campaign is to try and contextualize and give you a reason for doing what you're doing. And hopefully, to also diversify the standard multiplayer mode. This is the way that Brink did it, and it did it very well. Each side had a different objective, there were multiple objectives, there was kind of progress throughout the level, yeah? And that was really great. The problem is here that it's only using 2 sort of very basic multiplayer modes where both sides have exactly the same objective. And nothing changes. Nothing you do within it makes any difference whatsoever. You'd think maybe there would be a sub-objective which would cause something to change within the level. There isn't. Nothing of the sort within Titanfall whatsoever. As much as I'd like to say otherwise. The only difference is the cutscene that you get at the end. Either you win or you don't win. But the objective gets completed anyway. That's the weird thing. They kind of make an excuse like, well, we kind of pulled it off anyway, but we took heavy losses, or something like that. It doesn't make a difference. You complete the mission regardless. It just seems like such a missed opportunity. A hugely missed opportunity. And if there hadn't already been a game that had done the multiplayer campaign significantly better in the form of Brink, I maybe wouldn't have such high expectations. And I was really hoping for a game that was kind of like Brink with just better gunplay in general and better level design. And don't get me wrong, it has both great gunplay and fantastic level design. But the campaign's kind of a waste of time, really. This is compounded by the fact that all the exposition is done via voice acting for the most part. There's a couple of things you can see in a little picture-in-picture window. It's all, of course, entirely aesthetic. It doesn't affect the level in any way, or the gameplay in any way either. But aside from that, well, if you're on voice comms with anyone, of course the game has built-in voice comms, and you're playing as a team, then you're going to be talking over the voice acting. So, that's not really all that well conceived. So, I'm actually really disappointed with the campaign mode, and if you didn't have to play and complete both of the bloody things in order to gain access to the Striker and Ogre frames for customization, there is no way I would even bother. I suppose it's kind of convenient that it's required, because my recommendation would be run through the campaign on both sides once, which, if you're lucky and you get into games fast enough, will probably take you an hour and a half per campaign, because there's 9 missions, and all the missions take about 10 minutes each, give or take. Some take a little less, some take a little more. But they're all around 10 minutes in length. Do that, and never touch it again, because there's no point. Not a reason whatsoever. And that could be a real problem, especially later on in the life cycle of the title, when people have already done the campaign, new people coming in trying to get access to the Striker and the Ogre, they might not be able to find campaign games, because people won't even bother queuing for them. Now, in Brink, it wasn't really so much of an issue if you wanted to complete the campaign, because all of the missions would kind of count towards the campaign anyway, even if you weren't directly playing the campaign mode. But in this, when you play, say, an attrition on the same level as you would play a campaign attrition, it's not quite the same, because there are cutscenes and a couple of maybe aesthetic scripted events in the campaign version, as opposed to the regular classic multiplayer version. So there isn't any crossover. Like, you can't really kill two birds with one stone there. So I can see that being a problem in the future, and it might even be that they decide that they've got to change the system so that you can unlock Ogre and Striker in a different way. I don't see that being a problem on launch, of course, absolutely not. It's been a problem in the pre-release because there aren't enough players, but yeah. That's my biggest complaint. Campaign mode could have been so much more, and it isn't. And it definitely feels tacked on. My issue with it, really, is it seems like the story was merely created to fit in with the levels themselves, yeah, with the actual maps. It's a thin veneer of context that is slapped over the map itself, and they're kind of hoping that you don't notice. Unfortunately, you definitely notice, and I am just kind of let down by that. However, again, that's my biggest complaint. I've talked about the gunplay, and I've talked about the way that the game works before, and I've talked about the way that I very much like it. I like the fact that it feels a little bit different. I think the mixture of PvE and PvP is very good, and it's certainly taking cues from Dota in that regard, and I continue to enjoy it. I'm kind of using, for the most part, the same loadout because I'm a big smart pistol fan, so I'm probably going to stick with that, and I do want to switch out to the Magnum pistol once I actually unlock it, but there are a couple of interesting options, and I've definitely used the different Titans, the default loadouts, as well as one new Titan weapon in the form of the plasma sniper rifle. The rest do take a little while to unlock. I like the fact that they've added a couple of extra elements to the maps. It's mostly in the form of these hackable turrets, which will then attack Titans and pilots that come nearby. You can hack them, you can also destroy them as well, and that's certainly worth doing. You probably saw them in the beta on the map, but they weren't activated. You couldn't really do anything with them, unless somehow in the many hours that I played beta, no one actually figured that out. I don't know what was happening there. Maybe towards the end of the beta they turned them on or something. But anyway, the point is that there is a hackable set of heavy turrets which you can use. Every now and again, there's also a couple of weird doodads and NPCs on the map, like those flyers. You can actually kill them, and they will give you points if you do it. There's also some sentry drones, which don't actually do anything, but they float around the Angel City campaign map, and you can destroy those as well. So there's a little bit extra going on for them. But the best thing to point out, I think, is just how well designed a lot of these maps are. Angel City's pretty good. I don't think most people like the other one, whose name escapes me, that had those stupid cliffs, but there are some really good maps. This is not one of the best ones. There's some really awesome ones that have huge amounts of different paths to take, a lot of different parkour routes and wall run routes to learn, so there's a nice high skill ceiling on just being really good at the map and actually planning your creep route and things like that. There's good urban combat, there's good outdoor combat, there's a lot of interior stuff as well, which you didn't really see a huge amount of in the two beta maps. So I'm really impressed with the map design, and there's a lot of maps to play on as well. Yeah, that's perhaps one of the biggest strengths, is they have a huge number of maps from the start ready to go, and that's good. Kind of needs it, considering that the campaign mode isn't much, and there aren't all that many game modes. Unfortunately, the kind of things that I hoped for, including just heightened escalation with more NPC types and perhaps NPC vehicles such as tanks, well, that unfortunately has not materialized outside of the heavy turrets, I'm afraid. That's a shame. It's a real shame. I'd like to certainly see more of that. Thankfully, there is a bit more Titan variety with the additional weapons. Let's be honest, like, the three beta weapons kind of worked in the same way. But now with things like the plasma sniper rifle and that grenade launcher, which is very good for taking out interiors, you do have some rather nice Titan rolls, and the striker in particular is a lot of fun to use because it's very mobile, especially once you get the dash core online. So there's a decent amount to be said for that. And of course there are different weapons. A lot of people still use the smart pistol or the shotgun. Yeah, the shotgun's extremely powerful even at fairly decent range, and of course the smart pistol has some very obvious benefits. So you're not really seeing too many people trying out the semi-auto rifle or some of the other SMGs or LMGs as of yet, outside of using the burn card variants, which are very powerful. Speaking of burn cards, of course there are a couple of extra burn cards available as well. Nothing that's really blown my mind though. I mean, one of the really cool ones is something called Wi-Fi hack, which automatically hacks any of the specters within range, and there's also this kind of commandeer one, which allows you to take control of friendly grunts, and you actually get credit for every kill they get. Not that they're going to get many kills, because they're grunts, but there you go. The AI doesn't seem to have improved in any way. You could still very easily kill farm any and all of the NPCs. So I suppose that's a little bit disappointing for some of you looking for a heightened challenge. You will not find it. As for those of you hoping for perhaps higher texture resolution, you're not going to get it. And the maps are still fairly impressive in scale, and they've got some really nice skyboxes and environmental effects going for them, but it's still the Source engine, and it looks like the Source engine, and the texture quality is the level that you would kind of expect from a Source engine with a couple of years of modifications on it. It looks pretty good, but there are some fairly obvious sections where there's some really poor texture quality in places, and I've been harping on about this a lot, I've noticed, like, especially with AAA games. I guess in 2014 I just expect more, and it seems like texture resolution, particularly on PC versions, is an afterthought. And, like, I have untold amounts of video RAM. Like, I could support really high-resolution textures. I've got a lot of hard drive space to support uncompressed textures as well, and I'm not getting them. They're just not bothering to put them in the game. And that disappoints me. Is it not okay to expect better in 2014? Is it not okay to expect them to not simply down-res the textures to the point where they'll run on anything and not bother to up-res them later? I mean, with ultra texture quality, in many places you would expect better than this. But it's still a decent-looking game. It's no Crysis 3, but it looks good, and in general, the overall aesthetic works very well. There's a good mixture of map types and environments and tile sets available, and it's not all grey. There's a decent amount of grey and brown in it, don't get me wrong, but there's also a decent amount of color in it as well. And I can approve of that. And things like the gun models look very good. They're bloody well better considering the size of the damn things. I complained about this in the beta as well. They're still huge, especially things like the sniper rifle or any of the anti-Titan weapons. Unnecessarily large models, and you can't really do much about that, I am afraid. So, what is my conclusion on Titanfall? Well, it's pretty much the same as it was in the beta. I like it a lot, and I'm going to play a lot more of it. I think it's a nice mix of the mech combat along with some very nice vertical movement. The verticality of the levels is a great strength, and the fluidity of the movement and the amount of stuff there is to learn when it comes to handling the various levels, I think is a real strength of this game. And outside of that, what you've got is a fun first-person shooter that is fast-paced and relies more so on movement than most of the first-person shooters that we've seen in the past few years. The gunplay still feels very much like Call of Duty. There's no doubt about that, outside of the Smart Pistol, which doesn't really feel like anything, honestly. It's, again, I think more so a Dota-inspired thing than anything else, but I'm going to continue using that gun. I'm not using it as much on pilots because getting a lock-on a pilot is definitely tricky. It's good to maybe get a shot off and then switch over to your auto pistol and follow up there, or just go for manual fire, which is reasonably functional, but it doesn't do anywhere near as much damage. Something like the shotgun will absolutely destroy you before you're able to kill anyone with a Smart Pistol unless you get the drop on them. The battlefields still feel very busy, and certain campaign missions, they feel even busier because NPCs sometimes start in Titans or with a big charge on a certain location, which again doesn't really do anything. It's all aesthetic, but it feels pretty cool. Don't get me wrong. And it's hard to complain about that level of detail, and even though the campaign doesn't really give you any choices and nothing you do actually matters in any way in the grand scheme of things, you can still be pretty impressed by the aesthetic, bringing down one of the big ships or anything like that. You know, it all looks good, but again, it's very, very superficial in that respect, and you are still just doing the whole Titanfall thing in the same way that you did it in the beta, and in the same way that you'll do it in classic multiplayer. I think the game's got a decent amount of legs. What I would hope for in the DLC is a campaign that actually has some branching paths. I think there's a lot they could do with that. Unfortunately, that also means selling map packs, but if they were going to do that with DLC, I'd at least hope that they prioritize kind of doing maybe a smaller campaign with some branching paths and with some more dynamic objectives. I want a more complex game mode. Attrition seems to be the most complex you're going to find here, but every game mode is very simple, and I was hoping for something like Quake Wars, or even Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, or something like Brink. I think this is the kind of game where that would work really well, particularly with the addition of these AI peons and minions. But they didn't. They didn't do anything of the sort there. That, I think, might affect the longevity, because I loved that level of both context and complexity. And you just don't find either within Titanfall. That said, I might be harping on it a lot, but you've got to bear in mind how positive that I was within the beta video, and that positivity does remain. It was a case of I was hoping for there to be a lot more than the beta offered, and what I got was an expanded loadout version of what I played in the beta with some more maps. And you know what? I'm totally fine with that, because Titanfall's still great. It's a really, really fun FPS experience, and it will probably be my main FPS game for quite some time. It helps that I'm reasonably good at it, and I think there's a lot to learn when it comes to the map design. More so than most shooters, honestly, thanks to the wall running and double jump and parkour mechanics. But I suppose the problem with a game like Titanfall is that it's a game of infinite promise, and you kind of expect the universe, so when you only get a couple of really pretty and enjoyable planets, it's hard not to feel a degree of disappointment, but I also have to kind of blame my own expectations, don't I? It's not necessarily Respawn's fault that they were unable to fulfill expectations that I personally held, and they never gave me reason to hold. You know? They never promised any kind of dynamic campaign, they never promised any kind of complex mode. And aside from that, what they promised is what we got. Lots of maps, lots of mech action, some fun gameplay, some interesting, if somewhat shallow game modes, and a fun next-gen FPS experience. That's what Titanfall is, folks. It's a great FPS. It is not revolutionary. Not at all. But that's okay sometimes. Bloody well better be. It's very rare that we get anything that's revolutionary in the game scene these days, so we're gonna have to make do with merely great. How unfortunate. What a world we live in where we have to make do with merely great. Titanfall's pretty awesome, folks. It just might not be quite what you were hoping for. My name has been TotalBiscuit, taking a look at Titanfall, which will be available on the 11th of March for $60 or your regional equivalent. It is multiplayer only. It is also Origin exclusive on PC and is also available on 360 and Xbox One. Thank you very much for watching, folks. You might see a little more Titanfall from me. Every now and again, I like to do a couple of FPS competitive videos, especially games that I'm not entirely terrible at. Although, I still have some work to do. I'll see you next time.